Bewildering plots, exotic locations, foreign lyrics, spectacular music, and yes, temperamental singers and conductors. This is the world of opera. In these programs, I will take you on a journey through the most thrilling art form of them all, one where all of human life and emotion are on display. Music fuses with words to create stories of love, betrayal, revenge, sorrow, passion, tragedy, and comedy, to create the stirring and most magical world of Italian opera. The Italians love opera. It's in their blood. In this film, I'll be looking at 4 composers who shaped Italian opera, beginning a whole new art form that 400 years later is still thrilling audiences. The smell of the grease paint. This is what opera is all about. I was born into this world. My father was a voice teacher, and he imbued in me a sense of theater, the voices, the love of vocal music, and just this backstage buzz just gets my blood going in a way that no other thing can. And now I'm lucky enough to have one of the top jobs in opera, music director at the Royal Opera House in London.
Ladies and gentlemen, you have 30 minutes, please. Thank you.
Today is the dress rehearsal of Barbiere di Siviglia, and I'm conducting the piece for the first time, so it's a really big moment for me, actually. The singers are all getting ready. Well, the announcement has been made that I have to get down to the pit, and so that's where I'm going now. Opera began in Italy 200 years before Rossini's highly charged Barber of Seville. And the man who composed its first undisputed masterpiece was Claudio Monteverdi. Monteverdi worked as court composer at the Ducal Palace here in Mantua. He came here in 1590 at the age of 23, employed by the powerful Gonzagas to supply music to order for all kinds of occasions. This is Vincenzo Gonzaga, Monteverdi's patron. Now here he is royally clad in ermine, and he had plenty of money for his mistresses, but was obscenely in arrears when it came to paying Monteverdi for his music. Monteverdi was treated like a slave in this ducal palace and was miserable, all the while producing heavenly music. Monteverdi wrote a wide range of music for his employer, and the fashion at the time was for extravagant courtly entertainments using speech, songs, and dance. These were going to provide the basis for something entirely new. In the late 1590s, a group of Florentine intellectuals got together and tried to find a way to combine music and drama. They wanted to return to the classical Greek and Roman idea of theater, of declamation. But what they wanted to achieve with the music and this declamation was something more expressive, more powerful, more emotional. Inspired by these ideas, Monteverdi used the Greek myth of Orpheus and created one of the first examples of what was to become a new art form: opera. Orpheus himself is a singer, so of course his story fitted perfectly with the idea of having a completely sung drama. He uses his musical powers at the gates of Hades to bring his wife back from the dead. But before the story starts, there's a prologue. In introducing his first character, the character named Music, or the spirit of music, if you like, perfectly shows this marriage of speech and music. Io la musica son che ai dolci accenti. There's no real pulse in the music, it's just free. So far tranquillo ogni turbato cuore. Just a few chords and, yes, almost spoken word, recitativo, or in English, recit. That's the shorthand we use. This sung speech was the revolutionary idea that created opera, telling a story and developing characters. Now, Orfeo, donde vieni in a different tempo? Dove vai? Where have you come from? Where are you going? Ninfa che porti. Monteverdi successfully integrated this sung speech with songs, dance, and scenic effects to create a complete dramatic world. And it was unveiled in 1607 to a delighted audience in Mantua at carnival time. The British Library holds a rare print of Monteverdi's Orfeo. I was very excited to examine it with the early music expert, Marshall Marcus. The word opera didn't really exist yet. This was called a favola, a fable, if you like, a story.
So it's like a sketch, and I'm thinking of something like, say, Kind of Blue, that famous album with Miles Davis. He goes into the studio, he's written out a little bit of stuff, he's got a few numbers here and there, and he gives it to the guys, and they use that. They create from that this extraordinary recording. This is much more akin to, I think, how Monteverdi's players are working.
So they're the jazz musicians of their time, is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I would say.
And Monteverdi used his musicians to create a whole range of moods and colors. Listen to this dance rhythm, very characteristic of Monteverdi. 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Sometimes 2 and sometimes 3. A pivotal moment is when the messenger tells Orfeo that his wife has died. Here Monteverdi creates a very special atmosphere and will, at the same time, move us deeply. A te ne vengo Orfeo, messaggera infelice.
Monteverdi said it was only through the uniting of poetry and music that it was possible to truly move an audience.
Di case più infelice, più funesto.
When Orfeo discovers that his wife has been bitten by a snake,
Oimè, che odo.
He reacts with shock. He freezes. And his musical lines freeze too.
La tua bella Euridice, oimè. Orfeo was such a success that Vincenzo Gonzaga ordered a second performance within days. This is the church in Mantua where in 1599 Monteverdi had married the beautiful Claudia Cattaneo, one of the singers at court. Over the years, she'd kept Monteverdi going in a job that was far from ideal. Mantua is a very difficult place to live in the winter, very foggy, very humid, and the drudgery of the work that Monteverdi was expected to do from those demanding Gonzagas made their life a misery. After the triumph of Orfeo in 1607, just a few months later, Claudia died. Monteverdi was broken. Now that he lost his wife, he knew he had to get away. And this is where he came, Venezia, Venice. A powerful trading port and a rich, self-governing republic. Monteverdi was now 46, and he landed the most prestigious musical position in all of Italy, Director of Music at St. Mark's Basilica. He worked here for 30 years. The job gave him the financial security he craved and left him free to compose for the local nobility and rich merchants, putting on shows in their lavish private palazzi. It was Venetian mercantile wealth that led to the next big development in opera. With all this money around, opera went commercial, and in 1637 the very first public opera house was opened. And it was around this time that the word opera, which means literally work or opus, came into use to describe the new art form. It was for the commercial stage in 1643 that Monteverdi wrote his final masterpiece, The Coronation of Poppea. It was highly unusual for the time because he based it on a true story. In a theater somewhere near here, the premiere of L'Incoronazione di Poppea took place. We're on the edge of town, and the premiere took place at carnival time, when, shall we say, morality and morals in general were slightly relaxed. I say that because this is an opera about the Emperor Nero, for all intents and purposes a serial killer, and his affair with the ambitious courtesan Poppea. Now this opera is so depraved, so full of sex, ambition, murder, intrigue. This is an opera written by a 76-year-old man holding the most important church musician position in all of Italy. And for him to write something like this, which even today is quite shocking, is remarkable. Yeah, it's hard to believe, actually. The sadistic Nero is being played by a woman, but in Monteverdi's time the leading man was sung by a castrato, a vocally gifted man who had been castrated before puberty, which left him with an ethereal but often powerful unbroken voice, the fashionable sound of the day. With Monteverdi, it seems there's tremendous degrees of variety. I mean, for this film, I'm workshopping a scene from the opera with soprano Danielle Denise playing Poppea and mezzo-soprano Sarah Connolly as Nero. There's a fantastic freedom in this music, depending on how you want to color the line. Poppea and Nero have just had a night of adulterous love.
Signor de non partire, sostien che queste braccia ti circondino.
These arms that want to wrap around you.
Come le tue bellezze circondano.
With this sinuous vocal line, you can picture the lovers wrapping their arms around each other. And then what we get is a dialogue, and he's talking about excuse me, your breasts, actually.
No, not my breasts, Poppea's breasts.
Yeah. So.
Di questo di questo se noi i pari. Guarda le mamme tue, le mamme tue più dolci, più dolci,
Playing Nero, you haven't to be sort of nervous about being specific and singing words like mamme, which doesn't just mean breast. It means almost like boobs, your beautiful, beautiful boobs that give me fantasies at night. That's all I think about. That's all I want to hold and touch and feel.
This would have been sensational, obviously, rather shocking, and therefore fantastic theatre. The 17th century Venetians lapped it up. They absolutely loved that kind of thing.
At the end of the opera, Nero has married Poppaea and crowns her empress, and they sing a sublime love duet.
An encircling of two people around each other where they sort of sing and echo each other's sentiments of love and devotion and commitment.
They finish on the same note, in total unison. And we very much try to tap into each other's sound so that we are like one voice that's split in two.
The coronation of Poppaea was the culmination of Monteverdi's brilliant career and was a huge public success. Monteverdi's works were part of an explosion of opera in Venice, and by the end of the century, 16 new opera houses were built there. It soon became a booming industry right across Italy. The great composers of the day were all at it. Vivaldi, Scarlatti, and Pergolesi, between them, wrote over 100 operas. And Naples became its next center, with the king himself a passionate supporter. Now, an opera house becomes an essential part of any proper palace. And this is a proper palace, I must say. But being a king, in his elite theatre, he only wanted extravagant performances of opera seria, heroic stories depicting the trials and tribulations of gods, warriors and kings, leaving comedy, opera buffa, to other theatres in the city. Opera is still a thriving industry in Naples. This theatre was being restored and modernized for the 21st century when I came here. Naples was a mecca for new talent and attracted the best singers and composers from all over Europe. One of the most promising to visit was the German-born George Frederick Handel. He came here soaking up the Italian style, which was all the rage. And the well-schooled, well-connected composer exported his version of opera seria to London. From the very beginning, Handel was exposed to the creme de la creme of English society. He lived here for 3 years at Burlington House, now home to the Royal Academy. He was the guest of Juliana, the dowager widow of the second Earl of Burlington. And when Handel's German patron was made George I, King of England, he couldn't lose. He was perfectly placed to spread the fashion for Italian opera. The king gave an annual grant of £1,000 to the theatre in the Haymarket, and Handel, now with royal patronage, went on to dominate the opera scene, opera in Italian, for the next 20 years. Handel's Julius Caesar epitomizes all the elements of his genius. Wonderful melodies, vocal and instrumental display, and at the heart of his craft, the aria, which had come a long way from its original meaning, a simple song.
Non ti sperar chissà, se il regno non l'avrai, avrai forte in amor. Se il regno non l'avrai, avrai forte in amor, avrai forte in amor. Chissà, chissà.
If you want to be a successful opera writer in the Italian style, you've got to write great stuff for singers. And of course, that's one of the wonderful things we find with Handel. He's saying, okay, let's take the aria, let's put the singer on the stage. This is the age of the singer, really. The singers are beginning to take control because people are coming in, they're paying tickets to go and see these operas. What do they all do?
So a star system.
It's a star system.
Avrai forte in amor.
Handel lured the best Italian singers to the capital, the pop stars of their day. They commanded huge fees and gave him the edge in London's competitive opera scene. Danny, you've sung the role of Cleopatra in Handel's Julius Caesar to great acclaim, and I mean, it's 8 arias.
It is long.
And a duet. What's it like singing and acting out so many different kinds of emotions? Because each aria is quite different from the other, isn't it?
That's my favorite thing about singing any of the Handel heroines, that you really have a chance to explore all of the different shadings of character of Cleopatra. Especially, you get a chance to really start with all of the playfulness and all of the bounce in her character, and then you sort of move to the seductive, and then on to some of the more powerful arias.
While he was in Italy, Handel refined his use of the da capo aria form, or what we in the business call ABA form. Now, da capo means from the beginning. And so a singer would sing an aria, would sing the first part, the A section, expressing a single thought.
Empio dirò tu sei, togli gli occhi miei, sei tutto crudeltà, sei tutto crudeltà.
In this scene, Caesar is furious because he's just been presented with the severed head of a Roman general.
Sei tutto crudeltà.
Then they would continue on to the B section, which would express a contrasting thought, or in this case, a heightening of Caesar's anger.
Non darei quel cor che dona sia rigor. Non darei quel cor che dona sia rigor. Che in sé non ha pietà, che in sé non ha pietà. Che in sé non ha pietà.
Then he would come back to the first section, the A section, but this time the singer was expected to ornament the melody, to embellish it, to bring new colors to it. Can you give us an idea what you would do with even something that's already quite florid? I mean, when you're doing these ornaments, you're going higher, you're going lower, you're...
As you would if you were in a towering rage with somebody, I suppose.
Tempio dirò tu sei, togli gli occhi miei, sei tutto crudeltà, sei tutto crudeltà. Sei tutto crudeltà. Tempio dirò tu sei, tempio dirò tu sei, togli gli occhi miei, sei tutto crudeltà. Sei tutto crudeltà.
Da capo aria should always be screwing up the dramatic tension as well as being musically accomplished and as well as entertaining the audience and provoking big applause at the end of the number.
Sei tutto crudeltà. Sei tutto crudeltà.
While Handel thrilled London with his opera seria, in Italy, opera buffa, or comic opera, with its simple stagings, was flourishing in small theatres that had sprung up in every town. Opera buffa told tales of ordinary people, albeit in quirky circumstances.
In an opera buffa, you get away from the conventions of opera seria. You can put servants on stage. You can make the story about the servants. You can give them the best music to sing.
Opera buffa appealed to the middle classes. It was much cheaper to stage, and now the public could actually afford to go. And the next composer to revolutionize opera wasn't Italian either. It was none other than the great Mozart himself. Born in Austria, he traveled all around Italy with his father, devouring everything he heard and performing as a keyboard prodigy in theaters like this gorgeous one in Mantua. He'd already written a couple of Italian operas by the time he was 14.
When Mozart started writing Italian operas, which was the prestige area at that time, the way you could make the most money, there's no doubt about the fact that he always wrote with a German accent, if you want. And this is particularly the case with the instrumental parts. Germans were famous for writing instrumental music. Italians were famous for writing vocal music. Mozart could blend those two together.
And when he eventually joined forces with the Italian librettist Lorenzo da Ponte in Vienna, they created 3 opera buffa masterpieces, Don Giovanni, Così fan tutte, and The Marriage of Figaro, about a crazy day in a noble household when 2 servants, Figaro and Susanna, are trying to get married. When you think that in the first number, for instance, of Marriage of Figaro, it's a wedding day, and all the preparations are being made. And you have the bustling figure. You have the second violin's playing this. Now, in a lot of other composers' music, that would be the main feature. But no, at the same time, we have a figure, a very measured figure. And this is Figaro measuring a bed, which is going to be the bed he and Susanna will sleep in, to see if it fits in this room. So together, those 2 figures. Against that, you have Figaro thinking, oh, this is going to work. This is going to be good. Oh, yes. Now, those are 3 different kinds of music, but they're all happening at the same time.
Cinque, 10, 20
Mozart makes the orchestra a character in the drama, evoking mood, telling us what the characters are thinking and feeling. He brought the lifeblood of theatre through the orchestra. Just listen to the woodwind duetting with Figaro's vocal line. But it's not just the orchestral color that makes the opera sparkle. It's the words. Now it's quite uncanny how Mozart, a non-Italian, working with an Italian librettist, manages to capture the rhythm of the language, the innate musicality of the language. Listen to this line. When Susanna is explaining how the Count is tired of chasing these foreign beauties, il signor Conte è stanco di andar cacciando le straniere bellezze forestiere.
Il signor Conte è stanco di andar cacciando le straniere bellezze forestiere.
The double consonants, cacciando, bellezze, beauties.
E di chi dunque?
Della tua Susannetta.
Di te?
Dimmi medesima. Ed ha speranza che al nobile suo progetto utilissima sia tal vicinanza.
A lot of time and effort was put into this way the language needed to jump off the page, so an audience would be kept on the edge of their seats, somehow kept alive by the rhythm that is in the speech.
Don Basilio, mio maestro di canto e suo mezzano, nel darmi la lezione mi ripete ogni di questa canzone.
Chi? Basilio? O birbante!
The Italian is perfect. In Handel's operas, characters rarely sang together, but Mozart seized on the dramatic possibilities of the ensemble, even allowing the servants to outwit their masters. The Marriage of Figaro has one of the great ensembles of all opera. It's the finale of Act Two, and what's brilliant about it is that it's many different kinds of music all at once. It starts with the Count trying to bash down the door, thinking that Cherubino, the young whippersnapper who's in love with the Countess, is hiding. So here the orchestra is just slamming away here and breaking that door down. And the Count saying, "Come out here, you wretch! Sciagurato, garzon malnato."
Escio vai, garzon malnato, sciagurato, non parlar.
Ah, signore, che furore, per le samme come tremor, per le samme come tremor, per le samme come tremor.
Finally, the door does open, and who comes out but Susanna? But instead of playing the dramatic card, Mozart goes in a completely different direction. Signore! The music is as coy as it is clever.
Cos'è questo cuore? Il brano prendete, il paggio cedete, quel paggio malnato, vedetelo qua, quel paggio malnato, vedetelo qua.
Of course, the Count is furious. I was wrong. How could I have been mistaken?
Che sbaglio m'hai presi, che sbaglio m'hai presi, appena lo credo.
So you see how the orchestra is participating in the way these people are thinking.
Signori di fuori son già I suonatori.
Imagine the theatrical tension that is built through these different layers in this ensemble, adding a character and then another character with a different kind of music.
Ah, signor, signor, cos'è stato? Che violenza, che veggi, che
The music becoming more and more energetic, more theatrical. Faster, louder.
Vengo qui per testimone del permesso matrimonio come stati
This way of taking the audience, of grabbing them by the scruff of their necks and showing them some incredibly real emotions, was just a step into another world. This is Mozart's genius, the way he has ratcheted up this tension to finish the act. Mozart's theatrical use of the orchestra laid the ground rules for the master of comic timing, who was as Italian as you can get, Gioacchino Rossini. Born in the small town of Pesaro on the Adriatic coast in 1792, just a year after Mozart died, he wrote 40 operas in 20 years.
When you look and you listen to Rossini, you have life.
Sarò docile amoroso. Scusi, no signore, non scusi, no questo. Tenerissimo di cuore. Scudiello, no signore, non scudiello, questo no. Colonare dozzinale. Amoroso. Colonare ma plebeo. Saro. Colonare dozzinale. Amoroso. Lei fa male. Solamente immaginare. La scenetta originale veramente ad raccontare. Mi fa male, solamente immaginare. La scenetta. Mi fa male, la scenetta. Mi fa male.
Rossini's father was a trumpet player and a horn player, and his mother was a singer. Now, his father was a fervent Republican and a notorious political agitator. In fact, he was thrown in jail for a year. And of course, this made life very, very difficult for the young Rossini and his mother. But he recognized his little boy's talent. And although Gioacchino was a mischievous child, a very mischievous child, he was very, very well trained from the very beginning, devouring the music of Mozart and Haydn, especially. In fact, in school, he was called Il Tedeschino, the little German, because he was absolutely, completely enamored of this repertoire. In fact, it formed him in a way. It imbued him with a sense of classicism, proportion, elegance, and wit, which became his trademarks, of course. Like Mozart, he was a precocious talent. He had his first opera staged when he was 18, and within 3 years, he had composed 10 more. It didn't take long for him to reach the famous stage of La Fenice in Venice. Here in 1813, Rossini was catapulted to fame with his opera seria Tancredi. He was 21 years old. Over the next 16 years, he rose to stratospheric heights, writing at great speed both opera seria and opera buffa. His musical versatility was extraordinary. He once famously said, "Give me a shopping list, and I'll set it to music."
Io giuro.
by Rossini's time, the rising star of the operatic stage was the tenor.
I think Rossini has played a very important role in putting the tenor on the top.
Io la ritroverò se fosse in gremo a Giove. Io la ritroverò se fosse in gremo a Giove. La troverò, sì la troverò.
When the castrati died out, he in a way passed that emblematic voice, emblematic figure, to the tenor and the mezzo-soprano.
Rossini was the master of different types of vocal delivery that showed off his singer's prowess. This style of writing for the voice was known as bel canto, literally beautiful singing. But it's so much more. I've come to the Rossini Festival in Pesaro to see my friend Juan Diego Flores performing in one of Rossini's lesser-known opera seria, Zelmira. It has some of his most challenging writing for the tenor voice.
Maestro.
Ciao, Juan Diego.
How are you? Come stai?
The day after the show, we met up for lunch, with Juan Diego sporting a beard grown for his role in Zelmira. Last night, you sang with such incredible virtuosity. I mean, I've worked with you, I've heard you sing very quick, I've heard you sing high, but yesterday, the extremes to which...
You can get.
No, but the extremes to which the music is written and the demands. It almost sounds unsingable.
You're right. In Rossini, you have to sing a legato phrase. Yeah?
A smooth
a legato phrase, and suddenly a passage of coloratura. Suddenly.
Fast-moving notes, yes.
Exactly. For example, yesterday in Zelmira. Se caro a te sonio legato, se respira il figlio ancora. That's the coloratura. So it's a change of gear.
Yes.
You cannot let yourself go, oh, se caro, because then you cannot do, oh.
Yeah. Oh,
you're too wide, you're too open, you're too...
that's a fantastic explanation.
So, you know, in the coloratura, you can depict different emotions, I think. And this is the wonderful thing of listening to a Rossini singer. That with the coloratura, he can be mean, he can be happy, he can be, you know, stressed, worried, tormented.
Dolce speranza, freddo timore, dentro al mio cuore stanno a pugnare. Dolce speranza, freddo timore, dentro al mio cuore stanno a pugnare. Dolce speranza, freddo timore, dentro al cuore.
It's the expression of extreme feelings. These crazy coloraturas, extreme music, mad tempi are the expression of the madness of the character, of the madness of his feelings at that moment.
Rossini's Barber of Seville is his crowning masterpiece, and from my first time conducting it, I'm working with the directors Moshe Leiser and Patrice Courrier at the Royal Opera House. The key characters are Figaro the barber, Rosina, a young ward, and the tenor Lindoro, a count, who's disguised here as a priest. Like Mozart's Marriage of Figaro, Rossini's Barber of Seville is based on a Beaumarchais play with the same central character, Figaro, played here by Pietro Spagnoli. Figaro's entrance aria, Cavatina, is no contemplative, sweet little aria. It's a storm of orchestral activity and rhythm. He is the everything to everyone, the factotum della città, and he says, make room for the factotum della città. But we hear his voice from off stage first.
What Rossini sets in this aria is a working class man, barber, that is known for being the matchmaker of the city, and obviously he's a man very much on demand.
He says, what a beautiful life I have. For a barber of quality. And we go ahead in that vein. In the next section, we encounter a device that Rossini almost invented and used very, very often, the Rossini crescendo. Starting very, very soft, the orchestra becomes louder and louder, gradually.
Tutti mi chiedono, tutti mi vogliono, donne ragazzi, vecchie fanciulle, alla parrucca, resto alla barba, alla sanguigna.
Here's the crescendo.
Tutti mi chiedono, tutti mi vogliono, tutti mi chiedono, tutti mi vogliono, alla parrucca, prendo la barba, che ne mi Figaro, Figaro.
They're calling him from everywhere.
Figaro, 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 Figaro.
I don't know what to do.
In the aria, he depicts a man under stress.
Una volta, per carità.
One at a time, he says. And then the patter of patters.
Bravo Figaro, bravo, bravissimo, bravo Figaro, bravo, bravissimo, fortunatissimo, 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 per verità. Fortunatissimo, 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 per verità. Sono il fantasma della città, sono il fantasma della città, della città.
The public couldn't get enough of Rossini, and his working life was as hectic as his music. He was contracted to write 2 operas a year for Naples, but The Barber was written for Rome, and legend has it he dashed it off in less than 3 weeks. And yet, he created one of the greatest roles for the mezzo-soprano voice. The heroine is played here by Joyce Di Donato. Now, Joyce, this is Rosina's entrance aria, her cavatina. We find out a lot about her in this aria. Can you tell us, what is it about her? What's going on?
Well, the first thing is she's a teenager, and she's quite impulsive and full of hormones, I think. The problem with her is that she's stuck in a room, barred behind windows, and kept by an old tutor who wants her for her dowry, for her money. So her goal is to find a way to break free. The way to that is via a voice that she just heard outside her window, who belongs to the tenor named Lindoro. And she thinks he's going to be the way out for her.
So she's quite resolute, yes?
Yes. And impulsive, I think.
And crafty.
Yeah.
c'è poco fa.
Plucked strings accompanying.
Qui nel cor mi risuonò.
The voice sounded in her heart.
Il mio cor ferito e già.
She's been struck by Cupid, if you like. Lindoro is his name.
Il piago.
First outburst.
Io sarà.
He'll be mine, I swear it.
Io giurai.
I will win.
La vincerò. Sì, l'indoro mio sarà.
She repeats the same words.
Io giurai. La vincerò.
It is the most difficult music. It has to be precise. The dynamic has to be right, the phrasing has to be right, the colors have to be right, the character has to be right. It is incredibly written music.
Sweet and loving. I let myself be led.
Mi fa guidar, mi fa guidar.
But
ma se mi trovano dove il mio demone non viverà sarò. E 100 dragoni prima di genere a giocare.
What just happened? What just
She
happened?
says, but, Ma, if anyone touches me, I can become like a viper and go back up and just rip scorn all over them.
It is that very malicious, rebellious character of a young girl that Rossini depicts in his music.
She's back.
Io sono docile, frustrated.
It's not a question of love, it's a question of air.
But now you did what we call a portamento. You glided, you brought the voice up, and you rolled the R.
Yeah.
And what does that bring?
What I think this does is really show Rosina's craftiness and her intelligence. She gets a bit carried away, she's a bit over the top, and she's got to bring it back to her task at hand, which is laying these 100 traps. So...
And then what?
She's back to her wily ways.
On the first night of our production, Joyce fell and broke her leg on stage. But true to Rosina's indomitable character, she soldiered on for the rest of the run in a wheelchair. Rossini wasn't the first composer to set the Barber of Seville to music. 30 years earlier, Giovanni Paisiello had a huge international hit with his version. On the opening night of Rossini's Barbiere di Siviglia, the theatre was packed with Paisiello followers who were there expressly to disrupt the proceedings. The opening night was a fiasco. But Rossini went on to have the last laugh, because his biting, cynical comic masterpiece completely eclipsed Paisiello's rather timid affair. By the 1820s, opera, like musicals today, was big business, and Rossini's Barber of Seville is still one of the world's most performed operas. Rossini was a true man of the theatre, and just before the finale, he throws in an incredible, crowd-pleasing showstopper.
And at the end, you have to sing one of the most difficult arias in the repertoire.
The moment we've been waiting for now.
Il più lieto e più felice il mio corte così avanti. Non fuggite o lieti stati della mia felicità. Non fuggite
aria is difficult because it's like a compendium of bel canto. This coloratura is very fast. It's the stretta finale, means the last race. And it has a lot of chromatisms, high notes, jumps, and it ends with a very long high note.
There's some variations now. Little stretta, in other words, a tightening of the music. Stretta feeling again, the Rossini crescendo. Dramatic scale. Typical cadence. Typical Rossinian ending.
You took me very fast. Yeah, it's fun, huh?
Yeah, it's great.
It's like a...
Hey, now I can say I conducted The Barber of Seville. End of the dress rehearsal. Audience very enthusiastic. In fact, the tenor aria stopped the show today. How far opera has traveled, from Monteverdi to Rossini, with Monteverdi's freedom and eroticism to Rossini's precision and wit. Grazie ragazzi. Bravi. Adesso lo dobbiamo fare di nuovo, Questo è In the next chapter of Italian opera, it will take the romantic bel canto fervor of Bellini and Donizetti to prepare the way for the titan, Giuseppe Verdi.
Good one, eh?
That was fun, I need this now.
Such fun.
Stay with us on BBC 4 as our musical journey continues with more Opera Italia coming next.
Singing is a wonderful thing. Anybody can do it. Even me, and in fact you're going to be hearing me sing quite a bit, unfortunately for you.
La donna immobile, qual piuma al vento,
muta d'accento e di pensiero. Opera is a passionate and thrilling entertainment. And within 200 years of its birth in Italy, it was so popular that even delivery boys were singing its catchy tunes. In the 19th century, opera in Italy is firing on all cylinders. Rossini is at the height of his powers. Donizetti and Bellini are writing stirring romantic operas. Into this august company is born a genius who will take opera to its zenith. Yes, Giuseppe Verdi. Verdi's operas are the backbone of the international opera scene and central to my repertoire as a conductor. Here at the Royal Opera House in London, where I'm music director, we're rehearsing one of his great masterpieces. La Traviata. Verdi was a consummate man of the theatre. He knew just how to construct a great show.
Verdi to me is quintessentially Italian opera. This is the real ragu sauce with pasta.
Quell'amor che palpito dell'universo intero.
If the human soul was a harp, and every string of the harp represented a human emotion, Verdi was plucking the right string at the right time for the right emotion.
Croce delizia, delizia al cor.
Passionate. I mean, that's what it is. It's passion.
But where did this passionate music come from? Verdi was born in the fertile plains of Emilia-Romagna in northern Italy in 1813. While the physical landscape was peaceful enough, the political situation was not. Italy was under French Napoleonic control, but that rule was being challenged in the north by the Austrians and the Russians. I'm in the village of Le Roncole, where Giuseppe Verdi was born. Very little is known about Giuseppe's infancy, but the story goes that Russian troops, rooting out French sympathizers, smashed their way into this church. We're in the rectory here. They found women and children in the church through there. They slaughtered them. But Luigia, Giuseppe's mother, brought her child through here and hid the little baby Peppino in the bell tower and saved his life. A miracle, a very operatic beginning. And the turbulent political environment would have a big influence on Verdi's art. His musical training began in this very church. As a boy, Verdi was obsessed by music. He studied with the village organist, and by the age of 9, had the job himself. He played on this very instrument. When he was a teenager, his parents sent him to study with the organist in nearby Busseto. Here he was noticed by the rich local merchant and music lover Antonio Barezzi, who soon became his sponsor. Now, Barezzi had 6 children of his own, but he invited Verdi into his house to stay and encouraged him to compose all sorts of music for soirees and concerts in his sophisticated salon. And while he was here, Verdi fell in love with Barezzi's daughter, Margherita, and eventually married her. When he was 18, Verdi applied to the celebrated Milan Conservatory, but he was rejected. Perhaps because he had an unorthodox piano technique. Whatever the reason, it was an enormous shock, and it may well help explain why his operas have such sympathy for outsiders and the oppressed. Ironically, that same conservatory now bears Verdi's name. Despite the fact that he didn't get into the conservatory, Verdi stayed in Milan and Barezzi paid for him to study privately. He even funded frequent trips to the opera, which at the time was dominated by Rossini, Bellini, and Donizetti. These operas were in the bel canto style. Bel canto, literally beautiful singing. And one of the new hits which Verdi certainly would have seen was Donizetti's Lucia di Lammermoor. The mad scene in particular caused a sensation. Here it is sung by the great soprano Joan Sutherland. Lucia has gone insane and is hallucinating after stabbing her husband to death on their wedding night. This is high romanticism, all the rage in art and literature in the early 19th century. With its extreme emotions and melodramatic stories, it transformed Italian opera too. Donizetti took the novel The Bride of Lammermoor with its mysterious Scottish setting by Sir Walter Scott and turned it into an opera that would epitomize the new Italian romantic style.
This idea of romanticism was obviously enormously important for Donizetti. He once wrote to a librettist. Librettist was asking, well, what kind of topic do you want? And he said, voglio amor e amor violento. I want love, violent love. It's not a great pickup line, but it worked very well for Italian opera at that period. And the women, the heroines, are usually reduced to their most impassioned and desperate state.
Lucia's famous mad scene is the climax of the opera, an incredible 15-minute display of vocal pyrotechnics. To understand how Donizetti used the voice to dramatize Lucia's insanity, I'm going to work on it with the great bel canto singer Diana Damrau. Glass harmonica imitates that phrase. Donizetti used the eerie-sounding glass harmonica to heighten the Gothic atmosphere.
Because it's an extreme situation, you can use extreme methods of singing, colors, dramatic outbursts. You must really play with all the skills you have.
She sings staccato notes, detached notes. She sees the blood on her dress.
It's really bipolar. You can see she switches completely into a different mood, and suddenly, out of nothing.
Scales and arpeggios. Lucia, with its extreme emotions and primary color passions, was an opera that would certainly influence the young Giuseppe Verdi. The orchestra rejoins now. Verdi's first big hit, Nabucco, features a dramatic heroine, Abigaile, who, like Lucia, plumbs the heights and depths of emotional extravagance. But Verdi intensifies the vocal display to underpin the dramatic situation. Nabucco tells the biblical story of the Jews in exile in Babylon, and it had powerful resonances for Italians at the time. After Napoleon's armies had been ousted, the Italian peninsula had returned to its fragmented state and was under the control of foreign powers. Verdi's contemporaries were quick to see the parallels between the exiled Jews in Nabucco and the plight of the Italian people. I'm just about to conduct a concert here in Naples, concert of Verdi's music. Perhaps the most important piece on the program is the Va Pensiero chorus, the chorus of the Hebrew slaves from Nabucco. We're going to have 9,000 to 10,000 people here watching it, and I think it means something very, very special, even today, to the Italian people. It's a feeling of identity and of history and of culture and nostalgia for an incredible past. This concert was broadcast live on Italian television to an audience of nearly 2 million. In Nabucco, Verdi found his true voice. The gestures are huge. Calling for the audience's attention. But also now, Verdi in this opera makes the chorus a protagonist. And this is a very important development in the history of Italian opera, that it's not just the star singers, but it's the chorus, the people, who have a voice. Praying for their freedom, for their release, on golden wings. Quite an innovation for the time, because the chorus is not singing in harmony, they're singing in unison, singing the same notes. They talk about the Jordan, le rive salute, their prayers to greet the River Jordan, their Zion's destroyed temples. Oh, my country, so beautiful and lost. So dear and yet so fatal that they break out into harmony. This made Verdi one of the most important figures of the day, because he expressed Italian pride, Italian nationalism, and brought the country together. In its very first year, Nabucco broke all box office records at La Scala, and Verdi's bankability led the two leading publishers of the day to fight over the rights to his work. Counterfeit sheet music was easy to make and very, very difficult to suppress, and it was everywhere. Now, for a composer like Giuseppe Verdi, and especially one as prolific as he was, it was of paramount importance to find a publisher who would take care of your music, print it, distribute it, and most importantly, make sure you got paid every time somebody wanted that music. The man who won the right to publish Nabucco was Giovanni Ricordi, who had a booming publishing empire. His relationship with Verdi wasn't simply financial. Giovanni and his descendants became his mentors and collaborators. Verdi's private life was as full of drama as any operatic plot. He and Margherita had 2 children together. But tragically, they both died in their infancy and were followed soon after by their mother. Verdi was left a widower at age 26. Despite his personal trauma, he threw himself into work. The 1840s for Verdi were what he called his galley years, during which, like a slave chained to his oar, he poured out operas, some successful, some not. By the time he wrote Rigoletto in 1851, he'd reached a new creative maturity, and significantly, the central character, like Verdi himself, was a widower. But getting Rigoletto to the stage was a drama in itself. Verdi was plagued by the censors who didn't like his choice of subject. It was based on a band play about depravity at the court of the French king, and it was going to premiere at La Fenice in Venice. Venice had a reputation, of course, in the past of being, shall we say, more morally relaxed. But listen to this from the Department of Public Order. The department deplores the fact that the poet Piave and the great Maestro Verdi have not been able to find any scope for their talents, other than the disgusting immorality and obscene triviality of the plot titled La Maledizione, the Curse. This was Rigoletto's working title at the time. His Excellency has decided to refuse absolutely the request for its performance.
The idea of Rigoletto was compromised also by the fact that it was based on a play by Victor Hugo, who was known as a Republican and therefore a dangerous character to start with. And his idea of having the King of France being this kind of libertine, immoral, trivial character was simply impossible as far as the censors are concerned. In the end, they came to a compromise, called him the Duke of Mantua. Apparently you could do anything in Mantua, it didn't really matter.
And the licentious Duke, the villain of the piece, was written for the tenor voice, another controversial move, because until now, audiences expected the tenor to be the hero.
He's turning convention on its head. The tenor is not the hero of the piece. The hero is the baritone. But he's a dark hero.
Rigoletto is a court jester who is physically deformed, a hunchback, an indication for audiences of the time that he must somehow be evil.
We have to put our mind in that period. Is early 19th century, is almost 200 years ago, and is not easy for anyone to write an opera like Rigoletto in that period. This is a revolution change of the structure of the opera.
Rigoletto is a heroic figure who is warped and poisoned by the world he lives in, and that world is exemplified by the handsome young Duke, who is utterly rotten to his soul.
La donna è mobile, qual più vale il vento, muta d'accento e di pensiero, sempre un'amabile, leggiadro viso, in pianto e nel riso e menzognero. La donna è mobile, qual più vale il vento, muta
The music he sings may be attractive, light, careless, but that's because Verdi's painting a very good portrait of an utterly shallow man.
Verdi created one of his most catchy tunes for the Duke, and soon after the premiere, people were singing it in the streets. It's in complete contrast to the dark music he wrote for Rigoletto. Now, we meet Rigoletto in Act 1, a caustic fellow making fun of everybody, mocking everyone, but he goes one step too far. He mocks Monterone, whose daughter has been seduced by the Duke. And Monterone puts a curse on him. Now, curse in opera is a very, very important device, and this curse will stay with Rigoletto. He goes home very troubled. Now, the composers before him, Bellini, Donizetti, and Rossini, did write very declamatory recitatives, but not to the same degree of intensity that Verdi now brings this. He even introduces what later became called a leitmotif, an obsessional visiting card, musical visiting card. That old man cursed me. And we will hear this theme over and over again in the opera. Quel Just one note that bores into him.
Natura, vile scellerato, mi faceste voi. Rabbia essere difforme, rabbia essere buffone, non dovere non poter altro che ridere.
The recitative now has become an enormous expression of his humanity, of his foibles, of his worries, of his entire psychology. And this is what Verdi has brought forward now in the world of opera, a deeper complexity, a much more theatrical pouring out of emotions, of expressions that will touch the audience. Unknown to anyone else, the widower Rigoletto has a daughter who he has kept hidden from the court.
He's writing about a father-daughter relationship in depth, and this is, of course, going to become one of his obsessive themes in the later operas, and something which he always depicted so successfully, because he always felt the loss of his own daughter.
And now the curse put on Rigoletto is played out. His beloved daughter is abducted and seduced by the Duke. Rigoletto, feeling betrayed, the orchestra again conjures up an energy. He's saying, you courtiers, you evil race, you accursed race.
Partigiani della razza dannata, qual prezzo vendeste il mio bene.
It's the moment where Rigoletto's mask finally drops, where he actually turns on the courtiers as an equal and really tells them what he thinks of them. He just lets rip. And Verdi does this through a pumping, muscular vocal line. The baritone is nearly shouting. You have to have a great deal of force to get through this number.
Opera is becoming something that now we recognize as being the most heightened expression of that which is in these, yes, deformed characters, these depraved characters, these flawed people. But they're characters that hold our interest. We want to know what is going to happen. By the time he wrote Rigoletto, Verdi had found love again with Giuseppina Strepponi, a soprano who'd starred in Nabucco. She was to devote the rest of her life to him. But she had tarnished her reputation with past affairs and illegitimate children. And when they came back to Busseto to live in the palazzo Verdi had bought, she was ostracized.
People started spitting at Strepponi in the street and so on and so forth. It became, in Catholic Italy, it became a completely different thing. And actually, in the end, more or less isolated her within the household. It was very difficult for her to go out and certainly impossible for her to take part in society.
Verdi's anti-establishment liberal mindset naturally drew him towards stories which featured characters that were social outcasts. Take, for example, Violetta in his La Traviata, The Lost One, a Parisian courtesan.
It's the first serious opera that's set in the present day. It's the first serious opera in which a soprano dies from a disease rather than dying of joy or from poison or whatever. So it's realistic to its very core.
La Traviata was based on a Dumas play, The Lady of the Camellias, about a kept woman who falls in love with a youthful admirer. It was, in Verdi's words, a subject from our own time, and resonated personally for him and his lover Giuseppina. Controversially, he wanted to set La Traviata in contemporary Paris in the 1850s.
It would have been immensely shocking had the people in La Fenice arrived and seen in contemporary costume that story. But that was a step too far, I think, for the management of La Fenice.
The censors did allow the opera to be performed, but like Rigoletto before it, it had to be set in the past.
You haven't done the last 2 times. But when she's thrown against the table, just a gasp of shock.
In Richard Eyre's production for the Royal Opera House, we've set it in Verdi's day. Violetta, the heroine, played by Renée Fleming, knows she's dying of consumption, but against her better judgment, she falls in love with the son of an impoverished country gentleman. Alfredo is played here by Joseph Calleja.
One thing he was very attracted to were complicated women. So you get a lot of conflicted women who change during the course of the plot and so on and so forth. And the most complicated, the most difficult, the most tortured heroine of all is Violetta.
In this scene, Alfredo's father, Germont, comes to tell Violetta that she must end her relationship with his son. Alfredo's sister is to be married, and his affair with Violetta threatens the family's name.
The heart of the opera is actually the duologue between Violetta and Germont.
Once again, Verdi is exploring the father-daughter relationship. Germont may start off as Violetta's accuser, but by the end, he is a consoling father figure.
It's a sort of perfect fusion of themes of respectability and loss of reputation and power and vulnerability, and fused together in that scene in a quite remarkable way.
They're singing and arguing and singing and arguing, and suddenly time stops. And just out of nowhere comes this ah in the middle voice that's completely exposed. And in that ah is, a lifetime of pain.
I think you should come off before, let the orchestra finish. In rehearsal, Renée and I worked on this very moment. just want to... There's a lot of important words, but the killer is the word pura. So I would save giving emphasis on the word bella and save it for pura, because that's what you ain't, and that's what he's been implying all along.
Right.
And that's very important, okay? Fabulous.
Tell your daughter who's beautiful and pure, like I'm not. Thank you for reminding me that. That's so powerful. Beautiful and pure, it's just, and by the way, that moment is absolutely where the opera turns. It's the turning point of the entire piece.
To Germond's amazement, Violetta agrees to end her affair with Alfredo for the sake of his daughter.
He sees that this is a wonderful human being, it's a wonderful woman. Her love is true, and therefore, ergo, tragic, because he would never back down from his own position that it's not possible. I think rather than being the bad guy, he realizes he's just the very dreary, fateful messenger. Mm-hmm. But yet, he would never change his mind. It's not an option.
Like Alfredo and Violetta in La Traviata, Verdi and Giuseppina sought refuge in the countryside. They wanted to escape the judgmental eyes of Busseto society. They moved to an estate that Verdi had bought nearby, the Villa Sant'Agata. Today it's looked after by a descendant of Verdi's family, Angelo Carrara Verdi.
It's a beautiful room.
Yes, this is the room of Giuseppina Strepponi. You can see the room with one bed, because in that period they live separate in the house. Because the much part of the day they spend separate in their room. This is Verdi's room. Qui lui, in questa scrivania, componeva.
This is the desk where he composed.
Look.
Wow. I don't believe it. Man?
Yes, prego.
Wow, this is the famous cylinder hat in Boldini's famous painting. I daren't put it on, but I...
This is the billiard room.
And who came here?
Usually they come Boito, Ricordi, Piave, Ghislanzoni.
The librettists.
The librettist.
Yes. Because they would have had to stay a few days and to listen to the maestro's instructions, of course, yeah.
Because the maestro voleva sempre cambiare un po' le parole dei libretti.
He's saying it in a nice way, but Verdi would have liked to make changes in the libretto. Actually, he was extremely demanding.
Yes.
Politics dominated Verdi's life. He was a passionate Republican and wanted to see his country unified. Italians even seized on his name and used it as a patriotic slogan, Viva Verdi, expressing their secret support for a new king, Vittorio Emanuele, Re d'Italia. Although Verdi was a spiritual man, he was dismayed by the Roman Catholic Church's opposition to unification. He was also fundamentally anti-clerical because of what he saw as the Church's abuse of its power. Nowhere are the conflicting interests of church and state better played out than in his epic Don Carlo, based on a dramatic poem by yet another great writer, Schiller. It's set during the religious wars of the Reformation. The Marquis of Posa, a young visionary, shocked by the oppressive nature of the rule of Spain over the Flemish people, gets an opportunity while he's back in Spain to confront King Philip II of Spain himself and describe to him the horrors that the Flemish people are experiencing. Now, Verdi in this music is less interested in form, less interested in structure, but more interested in going with the necessity of the drama. Posa, with incredible courage, says to the king that with one word could make the whole world a happier place by granting liberty to the Flemish people. This is followed by a very unusual and new phrase of Verdi's to express this new thinking of the younger generation.
What the music's doing is doing what Verdi often does, which is to express a vivid sympathy for the oppressed and a vivid dismay at the forces of tyranny.
And it's the fascination of King Philip with what Posa has just said, but he calls him a strange dreamer, and now he fragments that new music. The drama is now driving the music completely. So now what is recitative and what is melody or aria is much more fluid. It's much more difficult to tell what's going on, really, with form. Now, the use of chords here, just singular chords in a slow fashion, is something also very, very new. And he exploits this device. The king has heard nothing. Do not be afraid. But, and listen to these evil chords under which he says, Ma ti guarda, but beware of the Grand Inquisitor.
The Grand Inquisitor is the essence of a kind of negative, interdicting church. I mean, it's no accident that he loves this idea of the leader of the Catholic Church being blind and old. This idea of the Grand Inquisitor as someone who just powers through, unseeing, uncaring of idealism, of youth, just insisting on tradition remorselessly.
Verdi's musical characterization of the Grand Inquisitor is one of the most astonishing things he ever wrote. In fact, it's this characterization which is so precise that is a tremendous step forward in his development. Using the cellos and the basses and the contrabassoon in a serpentine melody and groaning trombones. We feel the tremendous weight of the church. Now he describes this man as 90 years old and blind, and a symbol of forceful negativity, which is the church of that time.
Vi feci chiamar mio padre in dubbio io son.
They talk about killing his own son. It's something so shocking. And of course, the Inquisitor says to him, gives him justification, says, well, God sacrificed his only son. In return for granting the king forgiveness for killing his son, the church wants the young idealist, Posa, disposed of. The Grand Inquisitor knows that Posa and the king are very close, but it is these revolutionary, innovative, visionary ideas of Posa that threaten the Grand Inquisitor, threaten the power of the church, threaten the traditions. Posa must go. After the dark and challenging world of Don Carlo, Verdi's next opera would prove to be something very different. This is Verona. 13,000 people come to hear Giuseppe Verdi's music and to watch this great spectacle, which is Aida. It's my first time here too, you know. Aida has come to symbolize the epitome of grand opera. Verona's classic staging has an orchestra of 150 musicians and a cast of 450.
Aida was commissioned for the opening of the Cairo Opera House, which was built to commemorate the Suez Canal. The Cairo Opera House obviously wanted to outdo Paris and French Grand Opera as much as possible, so the idea of Aida was clearly to produce something on an enormous scale, which would sort of create shock and awe in the audience.
The popular success of Aida was enormous. It went on to open in theaters all over Europe and America. But after Aida, Verdi wrote no new operas for the next 15 years. He didn't need to. He was a very rich man. Continuing his interest in Italian politics, in 1875, he became a senator. I'm traveling to Milan for the final chapter of this story. The world of opera was changing. In Germany, Richard Wagner's fusion of music and drama in a continuous flow, unbroken by recitativo or aria, may already have influenced Verdi while he was composing Don Carlo. He came to Milan sporadically to oversee productions of his works. You've got to understand that quality at this time was very much an up-and-down affair. Verdi's presence would certainly guarantee a certain, shall we say, seriousness of purpose. He was a tyrant. It was during these years that, through the machinations of Giulio Ricordi, his publisher, and the talented librettist Arrigo Boito, that Verdi was slowly lured back by the prospect of setting to music Shakespeare's Othello.
Verdi's Othello distills what's in Shakespeare. It's, in a sense, a Shakespearean opera, but it kind of takes it to a level of intensity and expressiveness that is beyond the spoken word.
Verdi has taken the operatic world by storm, literally. This is a man in his 70s writing something that had been germinating in him for years and years. And it prompts a musical response for him that is just overwhelming. Listen to Otello's entrance after the storm, having defeated the Ottoman enemy. He says, rejoice.
Sepolto in mar, nostra del cielo e gloria, dopo l'armi, la visse
That phrase is one of the most glorious entrances in all opera. Believe me, all the tenors tremble when they have to deliver this line, because it's like a visiting card, and they're going to be judged from this first phrase by the audience. And it will, in some way, set the tone for the rest of the opera. Verdi was inspired by Shakespeare's powerful tragedy about a warrior who is tricked by the unscrupulous Iago into believing that his wife, Desdemona, is having an affair. In it, he reaches a new mastery of musical characterization. Verdi never wrote more beautiful music, more music infused with a sense of purity and genuineness than he did for the character of Desdemona.
The best way to think about Otello is as a kind of commentary on earlier 19th century opera, where you've got Desdemona, who is the essence of bel canto, the old Italian tradition. And then you've got on the other side of this Iago, who declaims, who only sings beautifully when he's lying. So he's the modern man, he's the one who's trying to destroy everything.
His music is incredibly suggestive. Again, the orchestra playing a huge part in defining him. He says, I am wicked. I am a man, and I feel the mud of my origin in me. Yes, this is my faith. In other words, that which is evil inside him, the possibilities of evil. Listen to this music.
Son scellerato perché son uomo e sento il fatto originario in me.
There's a tremendous demon inside this man. But this is him in private. When he's among people, he's somebody completely different. The glory that was heaped upon Giuseppe after the triumph of Otello was something unprecedented. Of course, everyone expected him to enjoy this achievement and die a happy man. But the best was yet to come. In his 80th year, Verdi surprised everyone and produced his 28th opera, Falstaff. Verdi had devoted his entire life to opera. By the time he wrote Falstaff, he was a complete master of his craft, and he used all his technique and genius to produce a comedy, a brilliant one.
Sì, centro.
By the time you get to Falstaff, this octogenarian composer who's absolutely his own man, his own artist, is smashing all the forms of Italian opera. There are no arias, there are monologues, but nothing has an aria structure.
It's a miracle for a composer to come to this plane now, to embrace comedy. Look at the advice Falstaff gives to his two cohorts, Bardolph and Pistol. If you're going to rob, you have to do it properly. L'arte sta in questa massima.
L'arte sta in questa massima.
Rubar con garbo e a tempo. He says, rob with grace and with good rhythm.
Rubar con garbo e a tempo.
Siete dei rozzi artisti! You're rubbish artists! Falstaff sums up his philosophy of life at the very end of the opera, saying that the whole world is a jest, that we were all born jesters, and we are there to taunt and mock, but it's the one who has the last laugh who wins. And Verdi sets this philosophical credo, if you like, to music in the most incredible fugue. Now, fugue is a piece of music which starts with a theme.
Tutto nel mondo è burlando, è nato burlone, burlone, burlone.
And then another voice, or another instrumental voice, will sing that same theme at a different pitch while the other voice is continuing on.
Tutto nel mondo è burlando, è nato burlone, burlone, burlone. Tutto nel mondo è burlando, è nato burlone, burlone, burlone.
And the word burlone, which is very hard to say, burlone. We're all born jesters, but this adds to the life of the sound. And everybody has their voice until it builds up to an incredible pitch, fever pitch, in fact. He says, tutti gabbati, means we're all mocked. And they have to respond, the rest of them, tutti. Of course, his beloved orchestra gets the very last laugh. After Falstaff, Verdi lived on for 8 years, but there were no more operas. This is where Verdi died. Quite incredible to be in the same room, actually. You know, the story goes that as he was dying, they put straw out on the pavement, on the streets, so that the noise of the carriages would be diminished, so as not to disturb him in his last hours. In February 1901, a month after Verdi's death, 300,000 people thronged the streets of Milan to watch the procession taking his body to its final resting place. A huge chorus sang. Naturally, they sang his great hymn to freedom, Va Pensiero, from Nabucco. By the end of his life, Verdi had come to symbolize Italy itself. The operatic succession would now pass through a very different genius, Giacomo Puccini.
Stay with us on BBC 4 as our musical journey continues with more Opera Italia coming next.
There's a cruel irony in the fact that one of the greatest composers ever to write for the human voice died of throat cancer. Giacomo Puccini died in 1924, and the supremacy of Italian opera died with him. But let's go back. Puccini's career had an amazing trajectory, and with the success of his operas, especially La Bohème, Tosca and Madame Butterfly, he became a multimillionaire, spending his money famously on elegant clothes, houses, and fast cars. But apart from this colorful biography, there's the music. It is some of the most ravishing, intimate, passionate, sometimes even erotic and clever music ever heard in the theater and beyond. Opera in the late 19th century had been dominated by one man, Giuseppe Verdi. His works overall had come to define what opera was all about. Theatrical excitement married with rousing, noble, grand delivery. A powerful symbol of the Italian identity. The nation was desperate for a worthy successor. That role fell to Giacomo Puccini, a modern man in every way. In fact, he was one of the first composers to be captured on film, as this rare footage shows. Here was a composer who was to take opera into the 20th century, who looked beyond Italy for his ideas, and his music became incredibly popular. Sitting in the theater, you become personally involved with his characters. The emotions at once tender, poetic, flirtatious, despairing, and violent. By looking at 5 of his great operas, I want to show you that Puccini, through a mastery of melody and orchestral color, portrayed tragedy, comedy, and love, desperate, impossible love. begin in the garrets and cafes of Paris with what is probably Puccini's most famous opera. No other opera expresses the irrepressible energy of youth than Puccini's La Bohème. Drawing on his experience as a young student in Milan, he creates a story about 4 young students living on the edge, a musician, a poet, a philosopher, a painter. There's a story that Puccini, as a young student, shared a herring, one single herring between 4 guys, and this finds its way into the opera. Puccini throws you into a fleeting world of youth that everybody can relate to. And this is the secret of the success of this opera. As a penniless 22-year-old student in 1880, Puccini came to study here in cosmopolitan Milan, the most sophisticated, forward-looking city in Italy. Milan made a huge impact on the young Puccini, newly arrived from his provincial hometown of Lucca in Tuscany. Here, the latest ideas jostled with the latest fashions. In a letter to his mother, Puccini wrote, "How beautiful Milan is, and what youthfulness!" Puccini based La Bohème on a book by Henri Murger, Scenes from a Bohemian Life. In it, he found the cafes and street markets that he recognized from his own student days in Milan, and it captured his imagination.
There isn't a bar too much. The text is wonderful. It's vividly written. Everything he wants to say is in the music. And that is the wonderful thing about this opera. It's those 4 boys living together. And a lot of us have been students and we've shared apartments with other students. And in Bohème, they're all people that we can understand and associate with.
The musical roots of La Bohème are to be found here at the Conservatorio di Musica di Milano, where the young Puccini came to study. Although his family was penniless, his mother petitioned Queen Margherita, and the young Giacomo won a scholarship that opened the doors to the most prestigious music school in Italy. This is a bust of the young Puccini during his conservatory days. Handsome he is too. Reports say that he was easygoing but shy and certainly no model student. Inattentive, restless, and prone to writing letters in class rather than studying. He wrote to his mother, "I'm in dramatic literature class and I'm bored to tears." But at the time, it wasn't drama that captured everyone's imagination. Symphonic music from Northern Europe was becoming the rage. The Conservatoire Library houses the handwritten scores of the most important works Puccini wrote as a student, the Capriccio Sinfonico and the Preludio Sinfonico. Now, the key word is sinfonico. There are no singers to be found in these pieces. But the feeling for melody is extremely strong. The ending of the Preludio Sinfonico certainly leaves a debt to Mr. Wagner, whose music Puccini would have come across, as it sounds uncannily like the ending for The Flying Dutchman. Now, in the Capriccio Sinfonico, which begins with a quite bombastic and solemn, almost march, I would say, has a little surprise in its second movement, because here I'm astounded here to be looking at actually what is the music that became the beginning of La Bohème. This figure is jumping out at me here, and it's taken verbatim. It's just incredible to see this just note for note as the beginning of one of the most important operas in the repertoire. Puccini was 25 when he left the Conservatorio, and the Capriccio Sinfonico was his graduation work for which he received a distinction. After the first performance, one newspaper critic predicted that he had a future as a great symphonist. But Puccini had other ideas. A major revolution in opera was underway. Puccini and his fellow students, such as the young composer Pietro Mascagni, were looking abroad for inspiration. From Northern Europe came the operas of Richard Wagner, whose vision was for a total theatrical experience, one that highlighted other art forms such as design and stagecraft, while the music was written in one seamless whole. Attractive musical ideas were coming from France also, what with the grand ambitions and enormous spectacles of Meyerbeer. And of course, the phenomenon that was Bizet's Carmen. Gone were the princes and palaces of Verdi. Now you had murderers, gun runners, bullfighters, earthy, common people. Not as archetypes of good and evil, but real people with real problems. People you might even meet in the street. Romanticism was out, and realism was in. The Italians followed suit. In 1880, the author Giovanni Verga published a short story, Cavalleria Rusticana, rustic chivalry. A simple tale of passion, jealousy, and revenge set in a Sicilian village. This work became the beacon for what is known in Italy as verismo, realism.
Compare, fate come più vi piace.
It was Puccini's one-time flatmate Pietro Mascagni who in 1888 set Cavalleria Rusticana as an opera. Here was something raw and immediate, and importantly, something the Italians could call their own. Stories about everyday life.
It was in the air. Melodies became melodic at the point of exploding. There were blood transfusion on stage. I mean, if there was not the hurting, the flesh hurting the heart, it was not a masterpiece. It's not only the violence of a relationship, it's the violence of our feelings. I mean, Bohème is not certainly a violent story.
No.
It's a beautiful little...
Is Bohème a verismo opera?
Well, yes.
In Bohème, Puccini replaced the violence of knives and bloodletting with a modest but intensely tragic love story. At the heart of La Bohème are Rodolfo and Mimi. In this scene, the two meet for the first time.
Si sente male, impallidisce, e respir quelle scale.
All of the arias in Bohème, they don't have an introduction. If you go back to the middle period of Verdi, all of those operas, they all have introductions to arias, which the stage director has to stage. You have to have an idea about it. But the arias happen as in natural speech. There isn't a bit of music before Che geli da manina. It happens.
che gelida manina, se la lasci riscaldare.
One of Puccini's great strengths is the absolute economy of his writing. There's nothing melodramatic here. The orchestral accompaniment is so subtle, the text so naturally set, that Puccini really shows us what falling in love is like.
Ma per fortuna è una notte di luna, e qui la luna la diamo vicina.
They're terribly poor, but love takes over. And I think Puccini was into love, you see. I think he understood about love.
But our young student's happiness was to be short-lived. Mimi is dying of tuberculosis. The simplicity of their first meeting is echoed perfectly in Mimi's tragic demise. One of the great Puccini interpreters is the soprano Renata Scotto. She has not only sung the role of Mimi, but almost every one of Puccini's heroines in the world's major opera houses. Her recordings are a benchmark for performers and listeners alike. Perhaps one of the most poignant parts of La Bohème is Mimi's death. We know it's coming. We know it's coming maybe even from the very beginning.
It's the most beautiful, the most emotional moment in any Puccini's opera, I think. It's the most beautiful ending because it doesn't end loud. It doesn't end, melodramatic. And like she disappears, she goes. And the words are fantastic. I cry all the time when I hear this ending.
For me, the silence before her actual death.
Sempre con te, le mani al caldo e dormire.
That gets me every time, that one. She's gone.
Gone, but in the silence with that chord. Nobody's moving, nobody does anything. I think this is pure theater that gets the audience. You cannot keep your eyes dry. You can't. You have to cry.
Puccini premiered La Bohème in 1896 to mixed reviews. One critic wrote, "Just as it left no impression on the minds of the listeners, La Bohème will not leave much of a mark on the history of our lyric theatre." How wrong can you be? Today, La Bohème is one of the most famous and frequently performed operas in the whole repertoire. To find out where Puccini's prodigious musical talent was first nurtured, I've come to his hometown of Lucca, in northern Tuscany. During the Middle Ages, this city was known as the most serene republic of Lucca. It was famous for its silks and its textiles, but for centuries it also boasted a strong tradition of sacred music. This tradition was kept alive from the mid-18th century by the overwhelming presence of one family, 5 generations of the Puccinis. Puccini's father was director of the city's music institute and led the musical life of Lucca. Puccini was only 5 years old when his father died, and his funeral oration made it clear what was expected of young Giacomo. The city should and must turn the post of organist and maestro di cappella to Signor Giacomo as soon as he is able to discharge his duties. The poor boy had his future mapped out for him. Puccini embarked on a rigorous musical education and showed signs of real flair on the keyboard and at composition. But on reaching his teens, he became the family's main breadwinner, earning money by playing for church services. This is the church of San Pietro Somaldi, where Puccini's father and great-grandfather before him played the organ. All the signs pointed to Puccini carrying on the family tradition. But then one event was to change the course of Puccini's life forever. One evening, he and a group of friends walked from Lucca to Pisa, about 20 miles away, to see a performance of Giuseppe Verdi's opera, Aida. It was a theatrical event that just blew him away. In fact, later, Puccini was to state that it was as if a window, a new musical window, had been opened to him. But it was not just the music, it was the sense of place. Aida's Egyptian setting is part of its very identity, and this was to be true of all Puccini's operas as well. Perhaps the best example, his next, Tosca. This shocking thriller includes torture, attempted rape, assassination, execution, and suicide. And it is set right here in the heart of Italy, in the heart of Rome. Tosca is an intense tale of lust and political manipulation, set in a Rome under the oppressive regime of the head of the secret police, Baron Scarpia.
Tosca, e Scarpia che sciogliano il fuoco della tua gelosia.
Tosca is Puccini's bloodletting opera. The music is both dramatic and powerful and tightly wound around the action. The opera is set over the course of one momentous day in Italian history, the 14th of June, 1800, the day Napoleon invaded, and this is the backdrop for the unfolding drama. Here, time and place are as important as the characters, and Tosca is set in iconic locations around the city. This is the Palazzo Farnese, one of the most imposing palaces of the 16th century, and now the French embassy in Rome. The whole of the second act of Tosca is set in one of its rooms. Astonishing. I've conducted Tosca so many times, but to actually be in the room where the heart of the opera takes place is for me it's an amazing moment, actually. The walls are covered by these stunning Florentine frescoes celebrating the Farnese family's fidelity towards the church. How ironic it is that this be where Baron Scarpia conducts his business. It is here that he brings the liberal Bonapartist Mario Cavaradossi to be tortured.
Piaccia accomodarvi. O saper. Sedete. Aspetto. E sia.
I think this opera is a soundtrack of a movie. In fact, it was the beginning of the cinema in that period. And I think Puccini was in advance.
Negati d'avergli dato cibo. Nego! E vesti. Nego! E asilo nella villa che là sia nascosto. Nego! Nego!
In his mind, everything was with image. And the music was not just like a normal opera. It's 2 hours, and the sound with the action is perfect for movie.
The third side of this triangle is, of course, Tosca herself. A singer, a famous diva, fiery, a character driven by her pure love for the painter Mario Cavaradossi, a fervent religious conviction, and alas, political naivete.
Puccini wrote in such a way that everything you believe. It's a perfect dialogue between orchestra and text in Puccini all the time. All the time. And it's very powerful and it's very heavy in a way. It's very symphonic and very well orchestrated.
Puccini's great skill is that he crafts the music to the action very precisely. If a mood needs to shift at pivotal moments in the drama, the music unerringly sets the scene. In blatant abuse of power, he places the entire weight of Cavaradossi's fate on her shoulders. Submit to Scarpia's lust, Cavaradossi lives. Out of this desperate situation emerges one of Puccini's greatest, most moving arias for soprano. With this sublime fusion of music and emotion, Puccini perfectly captures Tosca's inner turmoil. "I'm a good person," she sings. "How can God reward me with a dilemma such as this?" Now we have real melodrama. Tosca does agree to Scarpia's demands, but unable to go through with it, she murders him and flees here to the Castel Sant'Angelo, where Cavaradossi is imprisoned and where Act 3 of the opera takes place. Dawn is breaking, and far below me, most of Rome is still asleep. Just over my shoulder is the Sant'Andrea della Valle church, where Act 1 takes place, and hidden behind that is the Farnese Palace. So the distances are very, very short. You can imagine Tosca running here after she has murdered Scarpia. But it's not just the specific locations that conjure up Tosca's oppressive world. What Puccini does in this opera is to create a musical soundscape that vividly captures the atmosphere of the city. The dawn scene at the beginning of Act 3 is a remarkable piece of writing. Here Puccini takes the sound of bells, myriad bells, a unique and recognizable feature of Rome, and recreates it in the music. Underpinning a sighing melody from the strings are the bells of Rome, and no other composer had done anything quite like it before. gives this music an air of authenticity, but it was considered quite unusual and strange. The actual sounds of the city superimposed onto music. What was this? And at the time it was quite controversial. But what a stunning effect, and what a new effect. But unfortunately, Puccini's innovations weren't to everyone's taste. One critic wrote, "If there is a God watching our poor country, Tosca will be an obscure and uncertain memory. A composition where there were the bells of various churches, everything was there, except music."
Mario, su presto, andiamo.
But for Puccini's heroines, tragedy is never far away. Cavaradossi is executed by Scarpia's soldiers, and for Tosca, there is only one way out.
It's very dramatic and very powerful. And I was thinking about the final scene. The final scene to have, that craziness. To think in 1 second, the only thing I can do is to disappear, to die.
Despite the critics' reservations, the public loved Tosca, which premiered in Rome in 1900, and Puccini had another hit on his hands. By now, Puccini's reputation and earnings were growing, and he was able to build himself a villa in the Tuscan countryside that he loved. Torre del Lago on the shores of Lake Mazzuccoli was to be his home for the next 20 years. Now it's where the Puccini Festival Foundation organizes the only festival in the world completely dedicated to the works of Giacomo Puccini. They also hold this rare archive of him. In Torre del Lago, Puccini could indulge in all his passions. He was an enthusiastic hunter. He also had a boundless appetite for speed and the latest motor cars. But above all, Torre del Lago was a haven from the demands of his increasing fame. He described it as supreme bliss, paradise, Eden, a refuge for the spirit. This is my first time here, and I have to tell you, it's a very, very special feeling. Puccini's living room. Of course, this is the piano upon which he composed most of his operas. He composed late at night, but actually with Puccini, often he was surrounded by his friends and he'd be playing cards, and an idea would come to him. He'd come over here, play a few notes, jot down his ideas, and return to the game. Though the house was certainly comfortable, domestic life for Puccini was never easy. He was living here with Elvira Gemignani, the wife of an old school friend, but it was a stormy relationship beset with violence and jealous tirades. She had a fearsome temper, and it can't have helped that Puccini was frequently unfaithful, and that he boasted that he was a mighty hunter of game, opera librettos, and attractive women. But Puccini's next opera would tell of a very different kind of domesticity. Once again, there was a woman at its center. It was on a trip to see the London premiere of Tosca that Puccini's imagination was fired by a play he saw here at the Duke of York's Theatre. It was written by the American playwright David Belasco, and it was called Madame Butterfly. Here was a heart-rending story of a young Japanese girl who falls in love and whose dreams are shattered by an irresponsible American sailor.
I remember I did my first recording of Butterfly. It was in Rome, and the assistant conductor was Luigi Ricci. Luigi Ricci did Butterfly with Puccini, and he said, Puccini wants this, Puccini wants that. And Puccini wanted really the drama from the first entrance, because the drama begins with the entrance of Butterfly.
From the outset, we're placed in Butterfly's world. We first hear the voice of Cho-Cho-san, a 15-year-old geisha, off stage. This was a technique Puccini often used to heighten the feeling of expectation. She's on her way to an arranged marriage with the American sailor, Pinkerton, who has basically bought a child bride.
Butterfly, she's the only and real protagonist in Puccini's opera. She's the only one where everybody turns around her.
But she gives everything up. She gives up her religion.
Exactly.
She gets married in a Christian way.
Exactly. So this girl waits for a moment of life in her life, and she believes that this man is the great opportunity.
Puccini described Madame Butterfly as the most evocative and heartfelt opera he had conceived. The great tragedy here is that Pinkerton is driven by infatuation and desire, whereas for Butterfly, it's a total sacrifice. Madame Butterfly is a huge challenge for any performer. Recently, I recorded it in Rome with the Orchestra dell'Accademia Nazionale di Santa Cecilia, where Angela Gheorghiu sang Butterfly and Jonas Kaufmann was Pinkerton.
I have the impression no tenor really likes to do this piece on stage, because it's such a shame how he behaves. This whole thing is only a setup to play around with that innocent little girl. He's never honest. He's young, he's fresh, and he wants to have fun. And since he has money, he uses the money to have the best fun ever.
What Puccini does musically here is wonderful. It is their wedding night, and over the course of a ravishing duet, Pinkerton's feelings are completely transformed, and he becomes truly intoxicated.
Puccini, he's doing a wonderful job on the duet. You know, sometimes, even if you are a liar, you believe in your lie, you know, so much to make the girl in front of you to believe. But at the same time, I think Pinkerton, in that night, he really was in love.
Sola delle parole che appaga gli ardenti desiri.
I believe that the best love duet is in this opera. And there is a seduction moment from Butterfly. I think that Vogliatemi Bene, it's a seduction scene. Butterfly grows from the entrance. The music is for love, and Puccini is in love with love.
The poetry of this moment, it's like a flower that opens slowly, and you are there. It's as if you are wax in Puccini's hands, and you're melting, and you even as a singer are melting away by this wonderful music. Many other composers had emotions, they had beautiful phrasings, they had wonderful melodies, but to put that all together in one line and to make it sound very smooth and very easy, effortless, is, I think, something that Puccini was capable much more than many others.
The tragedy of this story begins to emerge when Pinkerton returns to the US, leaving Butterfly pregnant. 3 long years pass before he returns, but the ultimate horror for Butterfly is that he has come not to see her, but to take their child for his new American wife.
Here we have a story of a woman from the beginning to the end, with a life destroyed by not knowing the world, and the same story all over again. It's very modern.
Having given up her religion and family, Butterfly finally gives up her son. For her, death would be preferable than the return to life as a geisha. It's an unbearably traumatic tale, and Puccini doesn't shy away from it. With Madame Butterfly, Puccini believed he had written his best opera to date. But the Italian audience felt very differently. The premiere was a complete fiasco, with boos and farmyard noises filling the theatre from the moment the curtain went up. In Puccini's own words, it was a real lynching.
One illuminating article written in 1912 by a young and feisty Italian, Fausto Torrefranca, Puccini e l'Opera Internazionale, was a 130-page tirade that slammed Puccini and the world he represented as being, quote, not art, but artifice. For Torrefranca, Puccini's operas were weak, impotent, and feminine. His attack on Puccini fired the imagination of Italians who were yearning for the monumentality of Richard Wagner's music, grandiose marches, powerful instrumental music, a modern-day soundtrack for an industrial, virile, masculine Italy.
The chance to test the nation's masculinity came, but in the most horrific manner.
Italy entered the war in May 1915 with a large but ill-equipped and ill-trained army.
By October, some 300,000 men had died. Puccini's stance was controversial to say the least, even before Italy entered the war against Germany. One story describes how, during a visit by the great Italian conductor Toscanini, Puccini announced that it might be a good idea if Germany did invade Italy to inject some good German order. Needless to say, the patriot Toscanini was incensed. Puccini also refused to sign a petition to a French newspaper denouncing the German atrocities, claiming that he had friends on both sides. When Italy was drawn into the conflict, Puccini spent most of his time at home. These stories demonstrated just how politically naive he was. To the majority of Italians, his actions were unpatriotic, and he was vilified for them. But Puccini continued to work, and when the war had ended, he would produce something completely new, something that would restore his reputation with the Italian nation. Puccini's answer to the First World War was his only true comedy, which premiered in 1918. Gianni Schicchi is the story of a resourceful rogue who manipulates a greedy family out of their inheritance. Its themes are universal, and in this Royal Opera House production, we've set it in the 1950s.
Gianni Schicchi is a kind of everyman. He's someone that you can identify with in a kind of earthy manner. If you're a gardener, you like to get your hands dirty. If you're a car mechanic, you need you need to get grease on your hands, and he's that kind of a man. He's a Mr. Fix-It.
In the first minute of the opera, the head of the Donati family, Buoso, dies. The Donatis are an old established Florentine family that have fallen on hard times and see Buoso's will as the solution to all their problems.
They're a kind of voracious family. You know, they've probably already been around the house with the coloured stickers saying, this picture is mine, that chair is mine.
Unfortunately, Buoso has left all his money to a monastery.
Ranuccio comes up with this idea, I have it. We'll bring Gianni Schicchi into the house, and he can take care of all these problems.
Gianni Schicchi is set under the cloudless skies of Florence, home to the Italian Renaissance and one of the most beautiful cities in Italy. By choosing to place his opera here, Puccini not only taps into a deep sense of national pride, but it's as if he's saying, I do love my country, and I am a patriot. Not only this, but coming to the aid of the established order, the desperate Donatis, is Gianni Schicchi, the new man, a vibrant force to reinvigorate old Italy.
Very good. Aging rocker. The characters are brilliantly drawn. They actually seem not to relate one to another, except when this avarice comes upon them. The way that Puccini represents all of that is just simply, it seems to me, absolutely perfect. He captures every little moment and every little character along the way with their own natures properly represented. Then there's nothing to query. You understand everyone at any time.
Schicchi's cunning plan is to persuade the family that he should impersonate the dead Buoso Donati and change the will in their favor. In this scene, Puccini's comic dexterity vividly describes the Donati family's avarice. This opera shows Puccini's extreme skill at ensemble writing, especially where he takes a musical device like a quartet, 4 people singing at once, and uses it to highlight their character. Puccini's very, very clever. Listen to this, where everybody's trying to fight their own corner. Here it's the rhythm, it's the words words like taccagna and sordida, spilorcia, gretta. It's music in itself.
Brava la vecchia, brava! Per la dote sacrifichi mia figlia a tuo nipote. Brava la vecchia, brava! Vecchia attaccata, stagiva, solida, fiducia, gretta,
I think that this, in the comic work of Puccini, is a real innovation. The tempo, the energy, linked to these characters fighting with each other. They're Italians, and they're explosive, and they want to kill each other, because throughout history, that's what these people always do. In the end, Gianni Schicchi, the new man of Italy, triumphs over the old order. By deceiving the Donatis, he ensures that their family fortune is left to him. To a nation emerging exhausted from World War I, the opera was seen as a statement of belief in a renewed Italy. It was applauded as a national masterpiece and went some way to restoring Puccini's reputation. Now in his 60s, Puccini was acknowledged as the grand old man of Italian opera. Yet he continued to feed his appetite for modern music, closely following radical developments by avant-garde composers such as Stravinsky and Schoenberg. This need to stay current and an exotic new libretto found an outlet in what was to be Puccini's last opera, Turandot, the story of an icy-hearted princess thawed by the flame of pure love and set in the China of legends. He throws down the gauntlet right away, creating what we expect, a Chinese musical environment. Here Puccini employed huge orchestral forces, his biggest yet, using a whole new palette of sounds, especially percussion, to set the scene and the mood of Turandot's China. Turandot's epic scale and huge choruses recall Verdi's Aida, the very work that had such an impact on Puccini as a young man. Turandot is based on a tale from the Persian epic 1001 Nights, and it's Puccini's most spectacular creation. You've created probably the most famous productions of Turandot that were ever done. The one at the Metropolitan Opera.
You conducted it? Yeah?
No, I never conducted it, but I was in the audience once for a dress rehearsal, and I just will never, ever forget it for its conjuring up of this world.
But he liked it, not because he was always been attracted by the Far East, Japan, China, all the Chinese music, and but because in that moment the women were opening up to the new society, the commanding and very, very merciless attitude, feminist in a way.
Puccini started work on Turandot just a few years after the First World War, and it is a brutal tale. The Princess Turandot has set a grim challenge to any suitor. Answer 3 riddles correctly, and she will give herself in marriage. Fail, and you will be executed. Ironically, the title role isn't really the heroine of this opera. The pure Puccini heroine is represented by a character that he invented, Liu, a slave girl. Prince Calaf is Turandot's latest admirer, and he has vowed to win her. But Liu is in love with the prince, and it's her sacrifice that will resolve the opera.
You is absolutely the sister of all the other girls that die young.
But she's a creation of Puccini's and his librettist, I believe. I don't think she was in the original story.
Well, he must have had in mind really to create at the end the message and the triumph of love, of humble love, faithful love.
Prince Calaf solves Turandot's riddles, but offers her release if she can find out his name. The only person who knows it is Liu, who refuses to give up her secret, so she is tortured and the crowd bay for her blood. The premiere of Turandot was planned for La Scala in Milan, conducted by the legendary Toscanini, but Puccini's health had begun to fail. He had been a heavy smoker all his life, and now he began to complain of a sore throat that wouldn't go away. It turned out to be throat cancer. The last aria that Puccini ever wrote is sung by Liu. Rather than divulge the prince's name, she chooses to kill herself, making the ultimate sacrifice. Puccini never saw Turandot performed. He died on the 29th of November 1924, the final scene still unfinished. At the premiere in front of a packed house, Toscanini put down his baton at the point where Puccini ceased writing, turned to the audience and said, "At this point, the maestro laid down his pen." Everyone left in silence. Puccini's death was cause for an enormous outpouring of national and international grief. The golden age of Italian opera had come to an end. But his music has retained its power to reach out way beyond the confines of the opera house. It was to be an aria from Turandot that was to prove the extraordinary power of Italian opera at the end of the 20th century. Nessun dorma. The legacy of Italian opera is extraordinary. Built on a foundation laid by Monteverdi and developed by a string of theatrical geniuses, it was aided and abetted by a language that
glorified the voice. It's had unparalleled success in transmitting every type of human emotion through every type of character, prostitute to priest, via the recitativo, the bel canto aria, coloratura, and declamation. It has touched millions and continues to win the hearts of people all over the world. Viva l'opera in italiano!
Go with the flow and drift off with Piano Flow, a new weekly dose of the world's most soothing music. Listen via BBC Sounds.